Okay, I want you to just look at a number with me for a second. It's Wednesday, February 4th, 2026. If you pull up the ticker for E2E networks right now, you're seeing a price of 2,452 rupees and 40 paise.
That is a very specific number and a very high one to kick things off with.
It is, but that price isn't even the headline. The real headline is the disconnect. Because if you look at the estimated intrinsic value, what the fundamentals say this company should be worth.
The actual math.
The actual math. It's sitting at about 121 rupees.
Okay, hold on. Let me just do that in my head. You're telling me it's trading at a premium of something like
1,916%.
Wow.
It's a kind of valuation that makes you want to, check if your screen is broken. And yet, just in the last week, it's up another 27%.
So that's the big question for us today.
Exactly. That's the mission for this deep dive. Are we looking at a classic market hallucination, a bubble, or is there something fundamental happening in the plumbing of India's digital infrastructure that actually justifies this?
And to figure that out, we really have to dig in. We've got a whole stack of sources here. There's financial data from smartinvesting.in from today, ICRA credit ratings from late 2025, some really interesting technical case studies from Dell, and even company transcripts going back to 2024.
So let's set the stage. Is E2E Networks just a web hosting company that got lucky? Or are they, as some people are saying, building the actual railroads for the AI century?
That railroad analogy it's the perfect place to start. Because if you still think of E2E as a web hosting company in 2026, you're missing the entire story.
The whole game has changed.
Completely. You have to see them as India's homegrown answer to a global crisis. The sheer hunger for AI infrastructure, specifically cloud GPU.
Cloud GPU. Okay, it's a term we hear constantly. But before we get into the tech, let's talk about the why. Why is there this frenzy? I found this amazing quote from Tarun Dua, the CEO, in a transcript from back in July 2024. He called it the compute gap.
And this is it. This is the macroeconomic foundation for their entire business model. If you don't get this gap, the stock price makes absolutely zero sense.
Right. He laid out this, this real aha moment for them. He basically said, look at India. We have roughly 20% of the world's population.
That makes sense.
And because everyone's so digitally connected, smartphones, UPI, all of it, we generate about 20% of the world's data.
Okay, so far so good. 20% of people, 20% of data. It sounds proportional.
It does. But here's the kicker. At that time, India had only 2% of the world's compute capacity.
Oof, that's a staggering disconnect.
It's a tenfold gap. You have all this fuel, all this data, but you don't have the engines to actually process it.
You're just exporting the raw material, essentially.
Exactly. And E2E realized that filling that gap wasn't going to happen with old technology. They bet the whole company on the shift from CPU to GPU. Now, for anyone listening who isn't an engineer, I put myself in that category, we should probably pause here. I mean, a chip is a chip, right? Why is this one shift so revolutionary?
It really comes down to the difference between, let's say, logic and intuition. Think of the CPU, the central processing unit, as the rule-based brain. It's what ran the world for 30 years. It's incredible at sequential tasks, spreadsheets, databases, a basic website. That's all CPU work. It follows instructions one by one, just really, really fast.
Like a super efficient accountant who follows the rules perfectly.
Precisely. An accountant who never messes up but can only do one calculation at a time. But AI doesn't work like that. It works on probabilities. It mimics human inference. It needs to look at a million things at once to find a pattern. A CPU just chokes.
They can't handle it.
It can't. You need a GPU, a graphics processing unit. Instead of a few powerful cores, a GPU has thousands of smaller cores all working in parallel.
So if the CPU is like a Ferrari trying to move 1,000 boxes one by one, the GPU is like an army of 1,000 ants moving them all at once.
That is a fantastic way to put it, and the output is it's exponential. A GPU server might use 10 times the power, take up more space, but for these AI tasks, it can deliver 1,000 times the compute. E2E saw that the world was moving from just storing data, which is a CPU job, to generating intelligence, and that's a GPU job.
And looking at that stock chart, the bet obviously paid off. But here's where I want to push back a bit. I mean, anyone with a big enough checkbook can buy NVIDIA chips, right?
Yeah.
What's stopping me? What makes E2E special?
That is the critical question. And yes, in theory, you can buy the hardware, but making it work at this kind of scale, it's an engineering nightmare. Which brings us to their tech stack. We've got this Dell Technologies case study here that gives us a peek under the hood, and it's very clear this was not some off-the-shelf purchase.
No, it wasn't. They partnered with Dell to deploy these PowerEdge XE9680 servers. And for the tech folks listening, we have to geek out on the specs for a second. Inside these things, they're running NVIDIA H200 SXM GPUs.
Which are just absolute monsters.
But the spec that really jumped out at me wasn't the raw speed, it was the memory. 141 gigabytes of memory per GPU. Why is that the headline? Why does memory matter so much here?
It all comes down to the physics of generative AI. These large language models, the brains behind everything, are massive. I mean, gigabytes, sometimes terabytes in size. To work efficiently, that model needs to sit right there on the chip.
Okay, so it has to be close to the processor.
Exactly. If the model is too big for the chip's memory, you're constantly shuffling data back and forth from the main system. In computing terms, that's like driving across the country every time you need to remember a fact. It just kills your performance. The H200 having that massive memory bandwidth means the model stays put. And that offers something like a 40 to 45% performance boost for Gen AI workloads over the last generation, almost all because of memory.
So it's about latency, it's about speed.
Speed is everything. But there's another layer to their secret sauce. You can't just stack these servers in a room. When you have thousands of GPUs all trying to talk to each other to train one giant model, the network itself becomes the bottleneck.
It's like having that Ferrari engine, but you're stuck in rush hour traffic.
Perfect analogy. And that's why the sources all highlight their leaf-spine architecture with 400G throughput.
Okay, leaf spine. You're going to have to explain that to me like I'm 5, because my eyes are already starting to glaze over.
Sure. So imagine a normal network is like a tree. To get from a leaf on one branch to a leaf on another, you have to go all the way down the trunk and back up again. It's slow. In a leaf spine setup, it's more like a mesh. Every part is connected to every other part. Data can get from any server to any other server in the exact same number of steps. It's a traffic system with no stoplights.
And that 400G number.
That's the speed limit on that superhighway. It's incredibly fast. It means E2E didn't just buy the Ferraris, they built a custom racetrack just so those Ferraris could hit top speed, always.
Okay, so they have the tech, they have the architecture, that makes sense. But tech is a brutal business. Today's H200 is tomorrow's, I don't know, B100 or something else. To justify a stock price like we're seeing, you need a moat. You need protection.
And that takes us straight to their business alliances, because if you look at that ICRA rating from November 2025, so just a few months ago, a very, very big name pops up.
Larson and Toubro, L&T.
L&T, holding a 19% equity stake in E2E.
Now, L&T is a massive construction and engineering firm. Why are they interested in a cloud company? Is this just a financial play for them?
No, this is deeply strategic. Think about the physical side of AI. We just said these GPU servers need 10 times the power and space. You need huge data centers, industrial-grade cooling, real estate, reliable power grids. I mean, who builds that stuff in India?
L&T does. They build the airports, the power plants, everything.
Exactly. It's a perfect marriage. The ICRA report specifically says this partnership gives E2E priority access to L&T's data center capacity. So while their competitors are fighting for land and permits, E2E has a dedicated pipeline for the physical space they need to grow.
That's huge. That turns a digital advantage into a physical one. But there's another big partner here too, right? The government of India.
The India AI mission, this is critical validation for them.
Yeah, the sources mentioned a pretty big order from the first half of this fiscal year, FY26. E2E won a 265 crore rupee order from MIDI, the Ministry of Electronics and IT.
To provide over 2,500 GPUs.
That's not a pilot project. That sounds like nation building.
It is. This cements them as a key player in the government's push for sovereign AI. The government wants its own public cloud for Indian research and for startups, so India isn't totally dependent on Amazon or Google for its core AI infrastructure. E2E just became a partner in that.
So you've got the tech from Dell and NVIDIA, the physical backbone from L&T, and the stamp of approval from the Indian government. That's a pretty solid three-legged stool.
It is, and that solidity is what's driving the numbers we started with.
Let's get back to those numbers. Because expensive is relative. When you look at the growth, the valuation starts to make a little more sense, or at least you see why the market is so excited.
The growth is just explosive. The data from ICRA and Smart Investing shows their revenue growing at a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR of 46% from FY21 to FY25.
46% CAGR is incredible. But, usually with these high-growth tech companies, I expect them to be burning cash, right? Losing money to gain market share.
And that's the most surprising part. Their operating profit margins. They've expanded a lot. In FY21, they were around 30%. By FY25, they hit 59%.
Wait, 59% margins? That's software margins on a hardware business?
Yeah.
How is that even possible? This stuff depreciates.
It's the magic of operating leverage. Your costs are all front-loaded. You buy the chips, you build the data center, that costs a fortune. But once it's up and running, adding one more customer costs you almost nothing. You're just selling capacity on a machine that's already on.
So as revenue goes up, the costs stay pretty flat.
Exactly. And just look at Q1 of FY25. Revenue jumped 112% year over year. EBITDA grew 168%. The profit is actually growing faster than the revenue.
Okay. The business is a rocket ship. But I have to be the skeptic here. The stock is at 2,452. The model says you're 121. Even with those margins, isn't the market just getting way ahead of itself?
That's the classic dilemma, isn't it? The market is pricing in absolute future perfection. They're trading at this premium because of scarcity and first-mover advantage. There is a scarcity of GPU compute in India. E2E has it. The market is betting they capture the lion's share of that 10x compute gap we talked about.
They're betting E2E becomes the AWS of India.
That's the bet. But growth costs money. They raised 1,500 crore rupees in FY25 just to buy more chips. You have to keep feeding the beast.
Which leads us perfectly onto the risks. Because every deep dive have to look at what could go wrong. We've painted a pretty rosy picture, but there have to be storm clouds, right?
Absolutely. And for a stock price like this, any little slip-up is a disaster. The first big risk is just technological obsolescence.
A fancy way of saying your shiny new toy becomes junk.
Pretty much. They're spending all this money on H200 chips. But NVIDIA never stops. The B100 will come out, then the next one. If you buy expensive kicks today, and in 2 years a new chip is twice as fast for half the price, the economics of your old hardware just fall apart.
It's like buying a fleet of taxis right before a car comes out that gets double the mileage. Your whole fleet is uncompetitive overnight.
That's it, exactly. They're on this treadmill. They have to keep running just to stay in place, constantly buying the newest, most expensive gear.
And they're not the only ones who can run. We have to talk about the giants. AWS, Google, Azure.
The hyperscalers, yeah. They have pockets deeper than the Mariana Trench.
Right. E2E has an edge in India right now.
Mm-hmm.
But what if Amazon decides they really want this market and they're willing to lose money for 5 years just to crush the competition?
That's the nightmare scenario. If AWS starts a price war, that 59% margin we were just celebrating could poof, disappear. E2E cannot win a war of attrition against $1 trillion company.
So their survival depends on being nimble, local, and maybe a little protected.
Yes. And there's one more big risk, just execution. Those high margins depend on high utilization. You need those servers running 24/7. If the AI boom cools off even a little, you're left with a lot of very expensive, very idle hardware.
So it's a high-stakes game. Very high rewards, but very high stakes.
It is. They've gone from a small player to absolutely critical national infrastructure. But the rules of this game change every 6 months.
So let's bring it all together. You have E2E networks, backed by L&T, validated by the Indian government, running the best hardware money can buy, and filling a massive compute gap in the world's most populous country.
And trading at a price that demands they do everything perfectly for the next 5 years.
It's a fascinating story. But I want to leave our listener with one last thought to chew on. We've spent this whole time talking about the hardware, the chips, the data centers, the railroads.
Right. It feels like an industrial story.
It does. But here's the question I keep coming back to. As the hardware gets more powerful and way more expensive, will the real advantage, the moat, always belong to the company that owns the chips, like E2E? Or will the software eventually get so efficient that we don't need all this raw power?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Is E2E building the railroads of the future? Or are they buying the absolute best steam engines in the world right before someone invents the diesel engine?
It's a question of efficiency versus brute force. And right now, brute force is winning. But history usually shows that efficiency catches up eventually.
Something to think about the next time you see that ticker symbol flash across your screen.
And maybe check that fundamental score while you're at it.
Always good advice. Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Keep learning, and we'll see you on the next one.
Goodbye.